Everyone who grew up near Lake Wonapango had their own story about the lake. Some were your traditional and expected fish stories. Some dealt with summer love and improprieties, and others were tragic tales of misadventure. And then there were the other stories, ones that spoke of great loss, the kind that does not stop when the sufferer passes on. The Lake Wonapango held deep, dark secrets on its sandy bed, and sometimes those secrets floated to the surface. I remember well the night I myself came face to face with one of those secrets. All my years of trying to forget have done nothing but burn it more firmly in my thoughts. I was never the fishing type. While it was the most common pastime for those who lived around the lake, it was just never my thing. I did not have the patience or the appetite for the long hours spent catching the local fare. It seemed wasteful to haul them up and toss them back in. Still, like most folks around the lake, I had my boat. It was a little more than a rowboat. I mean, it had a tiny outboard motor strapped to it, but I rarely used it. You see, I took the boat out not for fishing or swimming, but just to enjoy the water. I always went out at night, and the growl of the motor seemed overwhelming in the otherwise peaceful setting. So, I used it as a chance to get a good workout in, rowing along a few of the calm, quiet sports I knew of. The night in question was one of those nights hanging in between spring and summer. The air carried the thick humidity of summer, but still settled on the cold side of warm. It was heavy with the hopes and aspirations of the summer. Crickets, frogs, and cicadas had all started their raucous chorus, so I would say it was anything but quiet out there. But out on the water, it was still peaceful. There's something about the Lake Wonapango that just feels right when the critters are singing out of key. And there were 2 empty bottles in the bottom of my boat, and I was just leaned back against the ledge, the lake water gently rocking me back and forth. The sky stretched out like an endless canvas above me, inky darkness pierced by diamond light. The moon was full, glowing warmly down on the scene. I know that this memory is colored by nostalgia, cast glorious in contrast to the events that were to come. But I don't know if I could imagine something better and more peaceful than that evening. Maybe that's why it had to go so wrong. Perhaps beauty and peace like that simply cannot exist in this world for long. The balance must be righted. In that moment of peace, there was a splash. Now, anyone who has spent much time on isolated waters can tell you a splash does not mean much. I was surrounded by all sorts of wildlife that may have wanted to slide into the water. Or a tree branch could have fallen in. Heck, it could have been one of the many local fish swishing to the surface to snag an unfortunate water skimmer. There was no real reason it should have caught my attention. Part of what bugged me is that it did, though. Whatever thoughts and reveries I had were lost and shattered along with the surface of the lake. I sat forward, scanning about. The boat listed a bit with my sudden movements, the bottles rolling and clanging in the bottom. The ripples began near an old fallen log that jutted its way into the river. Probably a turtle, I thought, swimming back to the shore after a long day of sunning. I tried to rest back against the boat, slipped back into my quiet contemplation, but my ears were on edge, straining for any other sounds. Silence. Complete and total save for the water lapping against my boat. The bugs and frogs had quieted down, and their absence made me feel suddenly self-conscious. I grabbed the oars to row back home, now feeling out of place on the lake that had always been home. As my paddles dipped into the water, I imagined I heard an echoing splash hiding in their noise. It was paranoia, I told myself, or an echo from the banks. But still, My ears strained. I finally paused mid-stroke, the oars lying limp in the water, and heard another splash following behind me. I spun around and watched as something broke the surface of the water. It was an arm, long and pale in the moonlight. I felt frozen to the spot, watching as the other arm rose and fell, gentle strokes pulling whoever it was steadily closer. I watched the faded shadow glide beneath the water, the feet arcing into the air and pushing it downward just before it reached my boat. People did swim in Lake Wonapango, so I assumed I must have surprised a sunbather or a skinny dipper with my evening sail. I wondered who it was, since they had obviously made towards my boat and darted away to avoid detection. My mind wandered to a couple particular townsfolk that I would not mind stumbling upon skinny dipping, but before the thoughts could get too far, something bumped the bottom of the boat. I was alert and scanning the water, assuming it must be someone playing a joke on me after disturbing them. I was not too thrilled about the potential baptism I might endure if they took it too far. My goal was relaxation, not swimming in the murky water. I watched for them, trying to see when they would surface, but no one showed. The second bump was louder, sending me careening into the side and almost overboard. It was no longer a funny joke, and I grabbed the paddles again. They could spend all evening in the dark depths of Lake Wonapango if that's what they wanted to do, but I was going to go home and put an end to the long day. The paddle in my left hand barely moved in the water before something latched onto it, ripping it from my hands. Wood splintered as it came free, disappearing into the water behind a trailing white arm. I watched it rocket to the bottom until I lost it in the shadows. I admit, I was cursing up a good storm out there on my boat. Down to one oar, it was going to take me a while to get myself home. This joke was not funny any longer. I took my remaining paddle and prepared for the long journey home. Only then a hand appeared over the side of the boat. The fingers were long, pale, and greenish in the light. I assumed it was the reflection of the moon on the water or something, but now I'm not so sure. One thing I did note as weird was the webbing between the fingers and the long, tapering fingernails. That hand was attached to a long, slender arm. Suddenly, a face broke the surface of the water. It was mostly human, but just not quite right. The eyes were too round, not the right oval shape. They also stretched a bit too big and had an unusual sheen to them. The lips were wide and flat, curled into a suggestion of smile. Overall, the face was somewhat flattened, but she blinked those big, shining eyes at me and I was caught. Her hand, a bit slimy, very cold, trailed along mine, winding up my arm. I felt myself leaning towards her, enraptured at the unnatural beauty. Her hair lay in wet ringlets along her body, and it was clear she was completely naked below the water. I could not tell you what else was going on in the world around me then, because my entire being was consumed with devouring her presence. It was as if I had never experienced a human connection until that point. Her lips slipped into an alluring smile, an unspoken invitation to come closer. I tingled with the feeling of her hand on my arm. I only later realized that the tingle was not simply arousal, but a potent toxin that left my arm numb for hours after. In the moment, however, it was bliss. Every nerve danced with her touch, sizzling to a new life as her skin glided over my own. I was in the water before I realized it, drawn in by her smiling eyes. I felt as if I were diving straight into her pupils, drenching myself in the dark depths. But the muddy water of Lake Wonapango filled my mouth, its vile taste reminding me that this was no paradise. My arms flailed about, the one she had carefully caressed flopping mostly useless in the water. I felt her hands running across my chest, the same burn of pleasure and paralysis following her fingertips. You would think that I have been able to realize the danger I was in with this mysterious creature, but I felt no threat from her. Even as she gently tugged me towards the lake bed, I felt she was only interested in my well-being. She could have held me underwater and watched me drown as long as her eyes held mine. No, it was not the awareness of her perilousness, but the long-forgotten admonitions of my parents. You never go swimming if you've been drinking. It was a recipe for disaster. Their warnings ringing clear, I made for the boat. I suppose she sensed my intention to escape, because those long nails on her hand began digging into my skin. Fortunately, she had well numbed most of my upper body at that point. I managed to flop into the boat, my vision going blurry around the edges. Eventually, the moon was the only thing left. That, and some thunderous pounding against the sides of my boat. I woke up the next morning, the heat having returned in force. My chest was sticky with blood, my head pounded, and my arms felt like they were filled with sand. It was a long, painful, exhausting trip back to shore as I stared down a long road of recovery and failed for getting stretching ahead of me. Most people blamed the bottles in the bottom of my boat for the strange report. I must have fallen in, gotten scraped up by some rocks. Others, I think, thought it was a suicide gone wrong. But I now know why the lake has claimed more than its fair share of victims. I know why men and women go missing out there, no sign of a problem in their peacefully floating boat. I stay away from the lake at night. I got lucky once, and I'm in no mood to tempt fate. I don't think I could resist those eyes this time, and I know I'd make my home on the sandy bottom of the lake if she ever invited me again.